Welcome to SAM Conversation, a program of South Asia Monitor. I am Col Anil Bhat. I'm joined by Lt Gen V.K. Ahluwalia, the Director of Center for Land Warfare Studies. His last appointment was GOC&C Central Command, and before that he commanded a corps in Leh from the Regiment of Artillery. Then we have Lt Gen Vinod Bhatia, former Director General Military Operations, until very recently, the Director of the Center for Joint Warfare Studies. Lt Gen Bhatia is a very qualified paratrooper from the Special Forces. Apart from his having been deployed for long periods in both along the line of actual control as well as the line of control. Then we have Mr. Mukul Shukla, a senior journalist who for a pretty long time was in the Hindustan Times and then was an editor with the Sahara Group and with Narad News. I will make an initial presentation, so to speak, after which I'll invite comments from all three of you. I think the first shock that China received was in 1967 at Nathula and Chola, when over a few skirmishes in September-October 1967, they lost almost 400 PLA soldiers, a whole convoy of vehicles and hundreds of bunkers which were leveled. That was the first shock, after which the PLA pressed very hard for the implementation of no firing at each other. Well, it's there's Lieutenant General Anil Bhat, incidentally a namesake, also a former Director General Military Operations. So this was, as I said, the first shock. And once the relationship between the PLA and the Indian Army became, you can say, bulletless, they gave us, they broke this, they did not break the bulletless clause, but they broke the clause of force, of causing death by killing 4 Assam riflemen at Tulungla, Arunachal Pradesh on 20th October 1975. And they were killed by torture. Barring this incident, till very recently, that is last year, in 5th May, 9th May, and 15 June, we saw again the PLA attacking, but not again with firearms, with crude, barbaric weapons, metal rods studded with, nails or wrapped with barbed wire. The second rude shock they got was when, after we lost 20 brave hearts in Galwan on 15 June, the riposte that the Indian Army, comprising of a group of 16 Bihar and some personnel from neighboring units, was a very rude one for the PLA, because some reports say that they killed about 43 or 45. But there are some reports which raise the figure to even over 100. The third rude shock they got was when Indian Army occupied the Kailash range on the night of 29-30 August 2020. We now come to a stage where the first stage of the disengagement has been carried out a few days ago, and as we saw, with quite a bit of alacrity. And some of us thought it's too good to be true. I now open, the House to suggestions. General Ahluwalia.
Thank you, Anil, for getting me on your show. Let me just add to what you said. The Chinese got a complete shock of our resolve and our actions that we took. Number one was a robust mobilization and deployment as they came. Second one, you already mentioned at the most appropriate and opportune moment, we took the action to occupy the strategic heights south of Pagong Tso in the Chushul subsector on the Kailash Ridge. Those are the strategic heights which open avenues into Chushul as also Phukche and Dumti areas. Third, despite the severe winters, we had made ourselves logistically balanced. Fourth, we continue to develop our infrastructure on the own side of the LAC, the line of actual control, despite objections by the Chinese. And the fourth and the fifth one is the most important one, that there was a response from all elements of national power. That means entire elements of national power, be it political, economic, trade, investment, information, psychological warfare, and also the public at large. Actually speaking, we actually gave them a great amount of shock. And you may recall, initially when we had the round of talks at the co-commander level, they just did not agree to disengage, de-escalate. But it's only in the 9th round of co-commanders level talk. Earlier, they were continuing to say that first India should vacate from the Kailash Range, which India did not accept. It's only in the 9th round of talks that you find that some kind of a agreement were actually considered by each one of them for a mutual disengagement. Also the fact, if you look at the northern bank of the Pagong Tso, earlier they had claimed always up to finger 4, and our claim lines were up to finger 8. And according to this agreement, they agreed to withdraw to finger 8 and up to Sirijab. That means the area between finger 4 and finger 8 is now in no patrolling zone by both the sides, and China agreed to demolish all the field fortifications what they had constructed in between ahead of finger 8 up to finger 4. So to that extent, if you look at it, and what I find in the subsequent round of talks, I'm sure as they had considered in the 9th round of talks, that they will now be considering areas in Galwan, as also in Hot Spring, Gogra and Depsang, as also the CNN junction, Chadingla, Ningluk and Nala junction in the south near Demchok. Depsang is a very important portion which is now under discussion, which they never used to discuss earlier. To that extent, I think it's a good that we are also discussing Depsang with the Chinese now.
Vinod, would you like to your thoughts on this?
Thank you, sir. Thank you for getting me on this forum. I'm in full agreement with General Ahluwalia. He's the co-commander there. He knows the terrain so very well. He knows the dynamics very well. Just a couple of points. One, the China-Vietnam War, where China has actually withdrawn or gone back from its forward deployment in areas which are disputed. Be it the South China Sea, be it in other areas. China has never ever disengaged and gone back. This is the first time ever. So I think to that extent, our resolve, our resilience, our very mature response where we said that no blinking, no brinkmanship, our General Alway covered it, our proportional deployment, which was equally rapid. So they have contributed, and definitely the Kailash Ridge occupation of heights on the Kailash Ridge on 29th, 30th contributed to us negotiating at near equal terms, because Chinese with China is a game of patience, it's a game of negotiation. So we've done that. But having said that, let me also go a step further, sir, in that there are a lot of questions being asked as to why we should not have vacated, or why did we vacate the Kailash Ridge heights. let me say that every QPK option and the quid pro quo option is limited in time and space. It can't be infinite. And once we had a very steady position right from the beginning that we need to ensure status quo ante. That implied that the Chinese go back to the positions as were on April of 2020, status quo ante. And that is what we have finally achieved after the ninth round of talks. And we saw a very quick disengagement, a very orderly disengagement from either side of Pangong So. And I'm more than certain that in the 10th round, they were taking a review of the disengagement process in Pangong So, either Pangong So, as also would have spoken about and negotiated the other areas, other friction points of Gogra, of hot springs, of Dipsang, and the CNN junction in Demchok. So I think that's work in progress. It is a long, tedious process. It will happen because I do think that China is looking at an exit from the present scenario, and it's a win-win situation for China. It's a win-win situation for India. Neither does China. China does not cannot afford a war with India, and India does not want a war with China. Thank you.
Lieutenant General Anil Bhat, you're from the Gurkhas, and when I say the first shock, the Gurkhas were a very major part of that shock in 1967, 711 Gurkha Rifles. Anyway, you must have seen enough of them during your service.
Yes.
And as the DGMO also. Your comments, please.
So I would start with that, of course, we all know the basic problem is because the boundary between us and even the line of actual control is not defined. This has led to friction increasing slowly. And my senior boss, DGMO, is here. He knows that every year there has been an escalation of friction which was taking place at various places, at the points of where we had varying perceptions. Of course, it became more serious in the last 5 to 6 years. And in Bhutan, in Doklam, where we decided to stop them. And it was a place where we stopped them in the territory which belonged to Bhutan. But the issue was it was very critical strategically very critical for the chicken's neck, and because of that ridge line to which they were wanting to come. And this last action has maybe in some ways been a blowback to that, where they tried to apply force, went to their points in the area of 14 core. Now, firstly, a word about what people say we were surprised. I would not agree to that. We were not surprised. The only thing is when they broke all the previous protocols, it took some time for us to respond to the new rules they had laid down. And that very quick and prompt response of mirror imaging the deployment, and also thereafter, when they did not pull out from the fingers area to occupy the ranges, Kailash ranges and the heights there, resulted in a position where China then started agreeing to pull back. Now, what is most important is in what has happened. We should not gloat over and say there's a victory for us or there is a defeat for China, or the other way around. The fact of the matter is
there's a school of thought that China may be thinking it's their victory, that because they were able to, because we left
they are varying perceptions. In fact, what in the Weibo and what is going on in their social media is there is a very, very strong voice that they have given too much to India. They have conceded more than they should. Of course, more important is that both the nations have to look forward to defining the boundary between both. And these SR level talks which have been agreed to, I hope they lead the way towards that. Because the final solution is we agree to a boundary, an LAC or whatever, but it is defined between the two armies. Otherwise, this potential of friction continues. Yes. And this may just be a temporary peace. Coming to the immediate problems of what is there in Gogra and Depsang, which has been a problem for a few years, I'm very sure the way the talks have been going so far and the indications China is giving presently, they will also be resolved for the time being.
Mukul,
Yeah,
um,
uh, yeah,
we've often discussed what should be done, what has not been done, or what needs to be done. You've been following recent events, quite closely. Your comments, please.
yeah. Uh, Actually, my views of China began in 1962, war. My father was all packed up to go. He belonged to 2 by 4 GR. He was all packed up to go to NEFA. And all of a sudden, on 20th November, uh, the siege fire, the Chinese offered a siege fire, and our government accepted the siege fire when the country was getting ready to fight back. That was uh, that was my first impression of war. In fact, when the war began, my father was so disturbed. He said, "We are going to lose this war because our defense forces have been ruined by this Nehru and company." That was his assessment of the situation. And because he didn't like the way things were going on, so after serving the army for minimal years to get his pension dues, he quit the army. Anyway, so that's how I started thinking about China. Now, while appreciating the military viewpoints of all the generals here, you know, my assessment is that it's more a political problem than a military problem. The question has to be addressed in political terms. First of all, when we talk about boundary between India and China, it's not between India and China. We have to be clear. It's between India and Tibet, and between India and Tibet, from the days of uh, General Hari Singh Nalwa, the boundary had been undefined. It was always open. Uh, Whenever and it continued till 1959, 1962. Even after that, till the Chinese started developing infrastructure and started blocking the shepherds from moving into their territory. Anyway, to cut the point short, there, the Chinese going back reminds me of the Mongol army's famous tactics of running away, apparently running away from the battlefield, and then when the enemy was chasing them, they would just hit back. So we should not take this Chinese withdrawal at its face value. We should concede. We should, in fact, uh, get to the point that perhaps they realize that they could not move forward, so they are withdrawing. So whenever they find that we are at a weakest spot, they would just advance back into the areas they claim. That's my assessment of the situation.
Well, you mentioned that what you had something to say about the issues that we should open with. But militarily, we've done whatever. Well, let's say after 7 decades, we've crossed a certain level, crossed a certain line. We've gone beyond what we were for almost 7 decades since independence. We were, we have to face it that we were bending. We were bending as far as the army is concerned. It was dealing with them with one hand tied behind the back. And
Yeah.
and this is India. We go by the. Thank you, Mukul. I will end only by saying that all of you have contributed to some very, very important and relevant points. And one thing that remains is no matter what has happened, we need to keep a very sharp eye 24/7 in the months and years to come. We must improve our surveillance capability, the strategic surveillance capability. And I'm sure the militarily we've improved a lot in the past few years. Thank you very much, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, folks. Right.